In 2019, we must ask ourselves, as much as we want, and as much as we plead, and as much as we conceptualize, do we really need an iPod Touch to carry us into 2020? If an iPod Touch does come out this year, that means it would be getting iOS updates for at least the next couple years. You think there's still gonna be people with iPods in 2021 that are expecting iOS updates, that are going against the trend and not buying the latest iPhone, but instead buying the latest iPod? All of these questions we will hypothesize in today's video, mostly because there is still some leaks and some code that is referencing a future iPod, that Apple is at least prototyping and working on one. Once again, not guaranteeing its release, but they're thinking about it. And I can tell that there's a lot of interest in the subject, given still the most popular video on my channel is why the iPod Touch exists, and not everyone agreed with me. So let's begin. So, as I've talked about in the past, my main problem with an iPod refresh is the simple fact that iPhones have been upgraded so much. There's been so many upgrades to iPhones over the last couple of years that even the old ones, even the cheap ones that don't have SIM cards, they're unlocked. You can just hand them to your kid and they can be bought for really, really cheap. Even Apple was selling the iPhone SE just a couple weeks ago for $250. That has a 4K camera, that has Touch ID, a biometric, that has fairly decent specifications in it, and people still want Apple to revive the iPod. Now, I don't know if I've promoted him enough, but the simple fact is I cannot stop promoting this conceptor. Apple iDesigner has once again knocked it out of the park with one of his more recent iPod Touch concepts. And the images that he tweets out or posts to his Instagram are always incredible, but these were, for me at least, quite jaw-dropping. I was looking at these pictures of what a bezel-less type of design, gesture-controlled looking iPod Touch would be, and while this opens a few questions of like, where's the front-facing camera? Is there Touch ID? Is there Face ID? Just simply looking at the idea of Apple kind of ending the iPod legacy on one final design that may not be key. It's not supposed to be better than an iPhone. It never was supposed to be better than an iPhone. But if they were simply to make a device purely for playing music, I think that excuses a lot of the design choices that Apple iDesigner went with. So yeah, there's no front-facing camera, but it wouldn't be the first time Apple designed a modern iPod Touch that didn't have a camera on both sides. For those of you who don't remember, there was a time when Apple, to keep the iPod Touch prices low, simply removed the front-facing camera. This was after the 4th generation iPod Touch. A lot of people forget about this era, but yeah, you could buy an iPod post 5G, post the new one that had the front-facing, rear-facing cameras, that new 4-inch design that looked more like the iPhone. Since then, yeah, they decided to remove the rear-facing camera just to keep the prices low. And I think if Apple was to inevitably end the iPod line on a high note and say, let's give it our all and let's make it a happy memory and just simply make the most minimal, clean-looking pod that is just designed to play music, and if there was to be one final iPod designed, it would definitely be the iPod Touch, because Apple's all about that Apple Music now. So they're not going to release an iPod Shuffle or an iPod Nano because those aren't internet-connected devices. They never were, and it would be bizarre to make them given they didn't really have that much touchscreen interfaces or barely any keyboards. So yeah, signing into your Apple ID or signing into Wi-Fi passwords, that wasn't going to happen. But if they were to end the iPod line on this look, I think it would be a very, very positive homage to what had been. So obviously you could have your gesture controls, and for a second, while using this concept he designed, for a moment, theorized the idea of a touchscreen iPhone without a notch, okay? You're no motorized camera, no Face ID, I get it. You gotta type in a passcode, which isn't as fun as simple biometrics, but this thing's not meant to be an iPhone competitor. Once again, I say this thing is just supposed to play music, so basically all it needs to have is an internet connection and Apple Music support, and they could put something really simple in it like an A10 or an A11 chip, and it would probably get support for a couple more years, and then I think it would be safe to say, like, if this iPod ended up happening, they could come out on stage and be like, so this isn't something that we expect everyone to buy, but it's something that means a lot to us, and it was a big part of our past, so we're happy to announce the last iPod Apple will ever produce. And that's where you see this revolutionary new iPod Touch design that is nothing fancy, but still a really cool looking device that would give people a taste of the future, where hopefully there's less notches, less camera cutouts, but for the most part can just be a small portable device that's really good at playing music, and I'm sure have the latest Bluetooth technology so that you can use wireless with it. And I think it would bring back a lot of emotions and make us feel very, very nostalgic of Apple still launching an iPod into the very beginning of the 2020s. But none of that is going to happen, of course. If you were to ask me, do I think this is an accurate portrayal of what the next generation iPod Touch is going to look like? No. Once again, if, that's a big if, Apple releases an iPod Touch this year, I imagine to be a similar upgrade to what we've talked about with the iPad Mini 5. In case you missed some of those recent leaks, the iPad Mini 5 is rumored to look identical to the iPad Mini 4. In design trends, basically all there's going to be is a microphone in a different place, and don't expect the headphone jack to be removed because there's no analyst saying that. And basically the only thing being changed is the internal specifications so it can support the latest version of iOS. In case you missed it, iOS 13 pretty much confirmed is not going to be supporting the iPad Mini 4. So Apple, in an effort to say that they still kind of somewhat care about the iPad Mini, or for the people who want a 7.9-inch tablet, they don't want to full-on discontinue iPad Mini support. So the year that iOS 13 drops, literally months before they start releasing iOS 13, that's when they announce the iPad Mini 5, which will be able to support the next few generations of iOS. That way they can discontinue the iPad Mini 4 because it has an A8 chip, which is way in the dust, way in the past, and I'm sure Apple at that keynote is going to be able to brag about how the iPad Mini 5 is a 200% performance boost because you're going from an A8 chip to an A10 or an A11 chip, and they'll be like, it's 500% faster, it's so much faster than the last generation. It's like, well, yeah, because it's been 4 years, so yeah, there's gonna be a little bit of improvement. And I would imagine an iPod Touch refresh in 2019 to probably be very similar. Design-wise, they'd probably keep it exactly the same. They'd keep the headphone jack there. Don't imagine Touch ID being there. And if you think that's insane, that's sadly what a lot of the software code that is leading so much speculation to conceptors out there thinking, okay, there's gonna be a new iPod, but there's not gonna be any biometrics on it still in 2019. That's why I'm suggesting that, is it's probably just going to be a CPU upgrade so they can say, well, we haven't officially discontinued the iPod Touch. They slap a new chip in there so that it can support the next generation of iOS and then say, okay, for the people out there who want an iPod Touch, you still technically can get one and it can still technically run the latest version of iOS. So if there is a new iPod Touch coming out, that's how I imagine it's going to play out. It's not going to be a giant refresh. As cool as that would be, and as much as I think Apple needs to hire Apple iDesigner to execute some of these excellent ideas of futuristic iPod concepts, there's plenty I'm sure you guys have seen out there, the iPod Classic refresh or the Apple Watch being merged into an iPod design. There's a lot of ideas out there and I get it, but the sad fact remains you can buy iPhones now that are cheaper than the current iPod Touch and have more features on them, have higher specifications, have more biometrics, better cameras, more storage. There's simply no reason in my mind for iPods to stick around. Even if you want to argue, well, kids want it or parents don't want to deal with the cell plan, you can buy unlocked iPhones now for under $200 that will be better than the iPod Touch, and they don't have a SIM card in it. So you don't have to worry about LTE, you don't have to worry about carrier plans. They cost nothing after you buy them initially, and at this point, keeping around the iPod or trying to give it some type of massive refresh is just going to hurt iPhone sales even more than they have already been hurt. And the smartphone market is in decline, it's going down, the smartphone market's plateauing at best, so really trying to refresh the iPod Touch and getting people to buy less iPhones would be a horrible idea for Apple right now. And can you name another company that's consistently releasing MP3 players? Not that many. I'm sure they exist, but they're really in the minority. Most people out there are using phones, they're streaming music now, they're not syncing it from their computers anymore, and Apple's all about designing things for the future and about where things are going, not where things have been. Even Steve Jobs in a lot of interviews talked about how all of the work that goes into Apple products is kind of like layers of sediment in a mountain, as in it makes the mountain what it is, but it is by no means something that is observed. You will never see it again. Steve Jobs was not very nostalgic and didn't really love playing homage to things in the past, so it makes sense that Tim Cook in 2019 is probably going to act very similarly and, you know, not make 10-year celebration devices or celebrating the iPod Touch after this long. They're usually more focused on the future and where things are going. But hey, at this point, if they could put a heart rate monitor in an iPod Touch, maybe they'd release it because Apple cares too much about health right now. They want to put heart rate monitors in AirPods and HomePods and everything. Put it in the iPod. Maybe it'll become a health tracking device. Who knows? Anyway, in regards to the iPod Touch, let me know what you guys are thinking about it down in the comments below. And if you like listening to podcasts, make sure you follow our podcast. First link in the description. We just released our longest one yet, so hopefully you enjoy. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.